So in this lesson, I'm going to walk you through the process, step by step, of writing a properly formatted and accessible HTML document. Now, as it turns out, those two things are one and the same. Fortunately, the web standards that have been published globally for everybody on the W3C's website at w3.org give you all the information that you need in order to do this, but I'm going to walk you through the steps. So, to complete the assessment at the end of this lesson, you're going to need to have access to a computer system with a text editing application and a web browser application. For the purposes of simplicity, I'm going to use a web application called CodePen rather than a text editing application. But what you're seeing here on the screen is Notepad++. It's a freely available text editing application on Windows, and you can download and install it on your computer at home if you want to edit text files directly. So as I stated in Lesson 1, HTML documents are structured semantically so that the information conveyed has meaning. Now in this lesson, you'll be introduced to the structure of a basic HTML document, which will form the foundation of all the lessons that will follow. The first thing you need to remember is that all HTML documents begin with a document type declaration. So here I am at codepen.io. Now I've logged into my account, but you can create an account for free at codepen.io and use this as a text editing application and learning tool. It's really nice. When you type your code in the boxes above, the rendering below happens immediately. So you don't need to, as you traditionally would, edit in a text editing application such as Notepad. Then you'd have to save your file, go find your file and open it in order to see it in a browser. In CodePen, you can enter the code directly into the HTML box and see it happen immediately and render for you and show you what it looks like on the page. So what I'm doing here is the doc type declaration, as I had mentioned a moment ago, tells the web browser that you're using the version of HTML in which the page is written and how to display the rules of that version visually in a web browser application. So according to the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, the current version of HTML is HTML 5.1 second edition. Now, prior to HTML5, doc type declarations were rather long, so you can see here this is not a short thing, neither is its friend below. The doc type you selected when you were writing your code changed the types of HTML elements, tags, and attributes you could use in your code. I did mention elements, tags, and attributes in a previous lesson. We will be getting into those in this lesson and subsequent lessons. So the doc type that you chose would make a difference in how web browsers would read, understand, and display your HTML document. So examples. HTML 4.01 included a couple of different options of doc types. There were strict and transitional versions. It was the primary HTML language in use worldwide from 1999 through 2014. So HTML 4.1 transitional had a very long life out there on the web. In fact, there are a whole number of websites still written with this doc type that have not transitioned to the newer one that's available. We'll talk about that in a second. So the transitional version of HTML 4.01, as we see here, was more popular. And the reason it was more popular is because it allowed web developers and designers to continue to use elements that were no longer officially supported by HTML standards as they changed over time. The benefit of this method was the ability to use old methods of accomplishing what was needed without breaking web standards, because the transitional version here gave you a technical pass on the issues that still existed in your code. So here's the doc type for HTML 4.01 transitional. So if you were writing a page in HTML 4.01 transitional, this would be the very first line or two of your HTML document before you wrote anything else. XHTML 1.0, we see a version, an option for that here as a doc type. XHTML 1.0 strict in this case also included a transitional version, but it's a version of HTML written to conform to the XML standard. XML being extensible markup language. What that means is that all the tags, elements, and attributes must be written in lowercase letters. Every tag must be properly closed in the code or the document will fail W3C validation checking. HTML coders who wanted to expand the interoperability of their HTML code by taking advantage of the extensibility of XML used the XHTML version. So here's the doc type for XHTML 1.0 strict. So the strict means that you can't deviate or in any way from the requirements of that particular version. Now for HTML5, which is the current version of HTML that is available, here's the doc type. A lot easier, a lot simpler. Doc type HTML. You put a less than icon, the exclamation point, the word doc type, a space, HTML, and a greater than, and that is it. Notice in one of the previous ones you were still including that initial doc type portion and the closing greater than, but everything in between was a little bit more convoluted. A lot simpler to use. So once you've written your doc type, which is always the first line of your HTML document, the next step is to write the 3 structural elements contained in all HTML documents. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these doc type code elements in my HTML up here on the left. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So that would be our doc type HTML. So once we finish writing that, the next thing would be to write the HTML element, and then also to close the HTML element. It's a good practice when you have a tag that requires a closing tag. Go ahead and write the opening and closing tag before you do anything else. We'll make some space here between the 2 tags. Now everything that's going to go on the HTML document is going to be between the HTML tags and after the doc type. The next element that you would write would be the head element and its closing tag. Let's go ahead and make some space for that too. And the third would be the body tag, which is where all the visual elements of the HTML document will appear. Let's put a little bit of space here between all of those so we can see them. So here we have our HTML opening and closing tags. We have our head section and our body section and our doc type. So these 4 things make up the primary structural elements of an HTML page: doc type, HTML tag, head tags, body tags. Something to keep in mind, you may want to write that down. Those 4 things are the 4 basic, fundamental, foundational structural elements of all HTML documents. So the only difference between an opening tag and a closing tag in HTML is this little / icon before the name of the tag. And that is only present in a closing tag for an HTML element. So when you write them all out, it looks like that. So let's go ahead and add some content then that's visible to our HTML document. Now, the head section of a document is more of a configuration area. It's where the meta elements are placed. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's more data about data. The body element is where we place all tags that are visible. So let's do a heading level 1 tag, which is just H1 and its closing tag, and a paragraph tag, which is just the letter P and its closing element. So let's write something in the heading. Notice how it appears down below immediately. So we have my first heading, which appears here, and my first paragraph, which appears here. So my first heading is wrapped in H1 tags, opening and closing. My first paragraph is wrapped in opening and closing paragraph tags. So congratulations. Following along and typing that in your CodePen or text editor will create a file that will give you this output when viewed in a web browser. If you are following along in Notepad++ but haven't typed the code in, you can go to CodePen and copy all of this, paste it directly into Notepad. You can then do a save as, and just remember where you save it. I'm going to save it on the desktop. We'll call it home.html. So now we've got a save here. We'll go to the desktop. We'll find home.html, right click and open. That'll open it in the default browser, whatever that is set to on your computer. It's different for everybody. And you're going to see the same thing here as you would in your pen, because it's the same rendering of HTML. So that's basically it. So I would encourage you before the next lesson to practice creating basic HTML documents using the elements and tags you've learned in preparation for the next lesson. Next to this instructional video on the left is an assessment, a PDF document that asks that you open that up, print it out if you can, or if you have Adobe Acrobat and can edit and add text to the file, go ahead and do so, and test your knowledge and abilities based on this lesson. So we'll see you in lesson 4.